afternoon. Welcome, everyone. And welcome to our event on improving retirement security and expanding coverage to all Americans. I'm glad you found your way. We are thrilled that you're here and thrilled to have Congressman Neal join us, and we are expecting Senator Harkin soon. This is such a privilege to lead the Aspen Institute's initiative on financial security. And many of you know we've been here for 10 years and been doing briefings in Congress since '04, and much smaller, not in this beautiful new building. Last year we were here with Senators Portman and Harkin on strengthening retirement security. And at the time of that briefing, I asked each speaker to give us a word. And the various panelists gave me words like advocacy and lifetime income and advice. This time, to make it easy, we really have only one word, Neal. It's coverage. That's the word of the day today. And by that, I'm not talking about apparel. I am talking about accounts. In some ways, this is the holy grail of our retirement system. Can all Americans be in it with an account? And I think today you are just going to hear a powerful group of speakers and two very important leaders in our Congress about this issue. So you have this beautiful set of bios at your plate. You know that we've got the best of the best today to describe this issue, and a really wonderful diverse set. So let me make a few more introductions. We have Debra Whitman, who's the Executive Vice President of Policy, Strategy, and International Affairs for the AARP. And in case you forgot the number, AARP's membership now is at 47 million Americans, part of the AARP. At the end is John Adler. John is the Retirement Security Campaign Director for the SEIU. And in addition to all the things you see on John's bio, remember SEIU has 2.1 million members. 700,000 of them do not have access to a retirement plan. So John, we're very thankful to have you here as part of this discussion. Next to John is Judy Miller. Judy is the Director of Retirement Policy for the ASPPA. And ASPPA's membership has grown to over 13,000 retirement plan specialists. So when we talk about delivering a plan to the country's small businesses, we've got the right person in Judy and the right institution in ASPPA. Thank you, Judy, for being here. At the end is Eric Rodriguez. Eric is the Vice President in the Office of Research, Advocacy, and Legislation for NCLR. NCLR is the largest Hispanic civil rights organization in the U.S. And just so you know, Latinos represent 1 out of every 4 school children today, and by 2025, 1 out of every 2 Americans entering the labor force will be Latino. It's a huge reason solving this issue of retirement coverage is so important for America and for the Latino population as well. Finally, Jamie Kalamarides, the Chairman and CEO of Prudential Bank and Trust and the Senior Vice President of Institutional Investment Solutions at Prudential. We won't solve this challenge without our financial services industry, and Prudential couldn't have a better representative here. For more than 135 years, they have been in this business, and $299 billion, Jimmy, you should really round that up by the end of the year, retirement assets under management. This is just their retirement assets as of this March. So as you can see, this issue of coverage, it's a cross-sectoral issue. It's a bipartisan issue. It has immense importance for a variety of stakeholders, and that's what's in this room. We are welcoming to the staff who've come off their congressional jobs to hear this briefing today. But also we welcome all of you, and we're going to have some time for you to join us in this dialogue. This is the issue of work today, which is how is its rewards? How is it rewarded? And the coverage issue, the issue of accounts, addresses both the issue of financial security for Americans and really the questions of wealth inequity. So this is really what we own. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Senator Neal, who I think has important news for us today. Well, I hear Massachusetts may be one of those.
Massachusetts, well, I think that's lateral.
Yeah. Congressman Neal, we appreciate your presence. We hear that it's not easy over there on your side of this hill, and we're excited that you've chosen to lead for so many years on this issue of retirement. And we thank you so much for being here and kicking us off on this discussion coverage. Please join us.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And thanks to our panelists. You didn't exactly pick a hostile panel.
Got enough of those.
Thanks for the forum. I think it's timely once again, and it certainly is important that reference you made to the Senate. With some humor, I was attending an event not long ago in Boston, which you might know is far from my media market, particularly after redistricting, where I now consolidated the western part of the state in my constituency. But as I was leaving this event in Boston, a woman rushed over to me and she said, "Hey, Congressman, I've seen your ads on TV. I'm voting for you for the Senate." And Ed Markey just happened to be standing nearby. He said, "Well, that tells a lot about your candidacy, Markey." I'm not even a candidate, I can teach you. This forum is important because a series of these events have been going on now for the better part of a decade. And I think that one of the things that the recession has called attention to is the need to promote retirement savings and take every opportunity and advantage of current options in the tax code to encourage people to set aside more of their own savings. You can recall the argument was to use the metaphor of the three-legged stool, some private savings, certainly a pension, and the guarantee of Social Security. You should know by way of background, I led the charge in opposition to President Bush's privatization plan for Social Security, and was essentially charged by the leader at the time, the speaker at the time, to do precisely that. The decision we made consciously was that we wouldn't deal with just those who saw Social Security as being the major component of their retirement plan, but we chose what we might have called at the time the suit and tie gang. So I did a number of forums where people were invited who you might not think would be the best defenders of the Social Security system. And that included the Denver Forum, the San Diego City Club, and the Cleveland City Club. And the idea was to take on the subject head on, use actuarial data to support my position, but understanding that the Social Security system was important to middle-aged parents or those just slightly before middle age who had college-age children, largely because you cannot simultaneously in this atmosphere pay for your children to go to college and care for an ailing parent. It was as simple as that. But we needed to convince people who seemed to be a bit removed from the system that the generational connection was terribly important. But back to that argument that I laid out at the beginning, pensions have changed dramatically in my lifetime. It's an astounding switch. We've moved away from the idea of a guaranteed pension on a date certain to the old notion that individuals are going to be more in charge of what retirement's going to look like. And that challenges all of us across the spectrum to understand what setting aside those prescribed number of dollars every month would be about. Now, I've had a long history going back to the Ways and Means Committee when Dan Rostakowski was the chairman. He did not like individual retirement accounts. And the reason he didn't like them, he didn't like a lot of people, but his argument was that the individual retirement account only used tax advantages to encourage people who already save to save more. Kind of an interesting argument, and there was some evidence, I think, to support that conclusion, and I took that argument on in the committee, and I sponsored legislation very early on. Now it looks, in retrospect, in the rearview mirror, it looks to be very modest in its proposal stage, to suggest that we should at that time move the IRA from $2,500 to $5,000. That was how simple the argument was. And it certainly improved my name recognition with him, I can tell you that. He did not like that idea. The original bill that I filed was joined by Bill Thomas, who went on to be the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. So at the outset, it was the Neal Thomas bill. And then when they won, it became the Thomas-Neal bill. And that's how it was introduced and successfully passed. But it was, I think, the seeds had been planted in those early years because I've been a real proponent of retirement savings. And I'm going to launch and move in and out of formal remarks and go back to some of the anecdotes that I think are equally powerful in D.C. We right now are in the midst of, I think, a dangerous conversation, and that is that the term tax expenditure is being thrown around as though it's just a big list of pork. And the critics frequently ascribe the $500 billion price tag to tax expenditure. Recall that all that means is that will be revenue that but for that provision in the code, it would go to the federal treasury. I am a big believer in using the tax code to promote retirement savings. I think that that's the only way that it's going to remain successful. So you're going to have the public side of responsibility, and you're going to have the private side, I think, of using the code to enhance opportunities for people to save more. I've been an equal opportunity critic of Republican and Democratic presidents on this issue, and continue to regard the notion of more savings as a plus for the American people. I think that tax incentives for retirement savings are not only critical, but the evidence is overwhelming that 70% of those workers earning between $30,000 and $50,000 a year participated in an employer-backed plan when it was available. So the point that I think is essential here is that for those of you who don't have any gray in your hair, you might want to think of this following number. Half the people that get up and go to work every single day in America are not in a pension plan. Half. So when President Bush said, if you remember at the beginning with some humor, he said you had nothing to worry about if you were 50 years old, the 49-year-olds in the country went wacky as they opposed the plan because they said we had set it aside. And I just want to say this, you're never going to have a long-range conversation about Social Security if half the American people come to believe that that is their retirement plan. That's the reality of it. So I think using this enhancement, or again, back to the metaphor of the three-legged stool, is very important. So one of my priorities in this current discussion has been to protect the current tax incentives for retirement savings, and if anything, try to improve them. That being said, I don't think the current system is perfect, and I know that we need to focus more on getting low and middle income workers into retirement savings. Frequently, the people that visit my office will come by and they'll talk about the notion of retirement savings, but I draw them into the challenge all the time. What do you do with the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum? They're the ones who have the least amount perhaps to save, but they're the ones that we need to be concentrating on and encouraging them to set aside a prescribed number of dollars every month. And I've been one of the lead sponsors here on the opt-out provision and consider that to have been a success. So for that 50% that I referred to earlier who are not in a retirement plan, we've got to figure out how to entice them to get into it. I want to say this candidly, the employer is going to be the enticer, because that's the easiest way to encourage them to save, getting the employer to set up the apparatus. Brings me to one of my favorite topics, and I have been the champion. I want to say this with due respect to the Heritage Foundation. Imagine that, a Democrat from Massachusetts having a plan that's been endorsed by the Heritage Foundation. That's pretty good, huh? Now let me tell you the reality of Washington. I can't get one Republican to co-sponsor my bill. That tells you about the stalemate. So Brookings and Heritage have come together on, I think, a very valuable plan. They've endorsed my auto IRA bill. Now, I've introduced it a number of times, and we're going to introduce it again today. And I would like to see some of you help me out in terms of getting some sponsors for this plan. But what is noteworthy for those of you who say, well, Congressman, you haven't gotten any Republican sponsors yet, I want to just, with some satisfaction today, say that 14 years ago, Fortune magazine put me on the cover, calling me a lonely crusader in an effort to kill alternative minimum tax. Well, 14 years later, I helped to kill alternative minimum tax. 1 million families in America in Massachusetts will no longer pay alternative minimum tax, and I think 27 million families nationwide will never pay it again. So these, from time to time, are long-term battles, but I think it's indeed necessary that we stay with it. So let me talk a little bit about the auto IRA, or as I call it, set it and forget it, for payroll deposit accounts. I understand that some of the critics were going to say that this is a mandate. I also will tell you this, I think it's the only way you're going to do this. Using the employer to help set up the mandate to get this done. Employers
will have to have a substantial number of employees before they're compelled to participate. I don't require any matching contribution. I don't require here that any fiduciary responsibility for management that would have to be set up. Now, I've had long conversations with Dave Camp, who's a very decent guy and a friend of mine from longtime service. And as he has questioned me about it, I have suggested that I think the efficiency of this will come from insurance agents, credit unions, and community bankers, because they will come to believe that this will be the door opener for more business. Once they're in the door, anybody who's dealt with an insurance agent, you know that they're going to be back to you within a year of having sold the product, advising you that there are other things that you ought to be able to do. It's a plan that has been endorsed, incidentally, by some of our participants that are here today, and I will list just a couple of them. AARP, the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce, the Women's Institute for a Secure Retirement Future, and the Aspen Institute. It's also been endorsed by Prudential, Putnam, LPL Financial, and Natixis. And I'm working hard with ACLI to get them to make a formal endorsement. Their member companies are certainly moving in that direction. So I've also been a champion of the savings credit. As you know, the current savings credit provides a tax incentive for families to save more, but because it is non-refundable, it does not benefit those who need it most. Again, low and moderate income households who have built little or no federal tax liability. So I would like to see the savers credit become refundable, because I think it would incentivize taxpayers to pay the credit into their retirement accounts. And I think that that has a grand opportunity for us as well. Now, let me just go off script here for a second. I think that the American people, after this recession, are thinking more about retirement. They're much more concerned about retirement savings everywhere. They're trying hard to set aside more dollars every month for that purpose. And again, I think by using the incentive of the tax code, and I want to tell you, I'm opposed to some of the proposals that are out there right now, because I think they're going to discourage savings. And if it means that we do let a few people at the top save more, that's okay with me. If we can figure out how to get those at the lower end of the spectrum into retirement savings vehicles. And I just want to say this, because I think it's important. Social Security is not going away. I have cautioned even those who used to come to my office with insurance agents. I have said to them a number of times, it is far easier for you to sell your products if the people know that they have a floor of benefits. And the opportunity in the private sector is to build upon the ceiling for benefits based on what people can afford to do, using the tax code as the necessary vehicle to incent that behavior. And I think that there is an opportunity here in a bipartisan fashion, if we could get past some of the talking points in this town and move in the direction of trying to find a substantial vehicle that would encourage people to set aside more of their savings. And just the last point. When President Bush proposed the privatization of Social Security, it set asunder again the traditional arguments in Washington. But for all of you here today, it was also a marker to understand Social Security is just not going away. And many of us, people like myself who grew up on the survivor benefits of parents who died in my teen years, I'm not going to vote ever to do away with Social Security. I think it binds us together as community, generation upon generation. So we have to figure out, as we go to the other two legs of the stool, how to enhance opportunity for other members of the American family to save more, but never to get away or retreat from the idea that Social Security is a guarantee. I have regularly used TV advertisements on Social Security, and I'll conclude on this line that I use in that ad. The best thing about Social Security, you can't outlive it. So it's our challenge to figure out how to use private initiative and the private sector to enhance further savings, and that's part of what you're doing here today. So with that, I know Senator Harkin has arrived, and I know it'll be hard to improve upon what I've said, but I'm sure he's up to it.
I'll give it my best shot.
I'll try them. And I'm going to bring it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. See you.
I'm going
Okay,
to.
run. If they want to take a couple of questions, if it's okay.
Before Congressman Neal runs, can we, there was an important announcement today of a new bill, and I wanted to give you a moment to say something about your automatic IRA or payroll. I think you called it the set it and forget it.
Set it and forget it.
And I wanted to just give you, we actually hope that that will someday be bipartisan. What's the element that you think will drive some of your Republican colleagues to embrace it? What's new about the bill this year that
Well,
may?
you know, it's part of the anecdote, again, it's kind of fascinating in this town and how the dialogue has changed in the 25 years I've been here. The freshman Republicans, when I say to them, I have a bill that's been endorsed by the Heritage Foundation, they will all say, could you send that bill over to my office? But there's never any follow-up. There's never any follow-up on their side. And so on the Democratic side, I simply say Brookings has endorsed the bill. And what I find interesting about it, though, is I can tell you this, Dave Camp and Pat Tiberi would like to figure out how to do this, because they both question me all of the time. And I think in a bigger deal here, this could be included, because I think that they want that incentive as well. And so I think there's an opportunity here, but I think all of you in the room, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or whatever your political leanings, I think getting people to sign on to this bill ought to be a priority.
And a couple questions?
Yeah.
Lenny Glenn?
Congressman, I came down specifically to express our continued support and appreciation for your introducing this legislation again. And as the debate evolves,
I thought I'd offer you a potential talking point from Governor Rick Perry during his campaign. He said, it's not a mandate if there's an opt-out.
Right. Good point. I'm going to really do well in Massachusetts between having the Heritage Foundation and Governor Perry supporting my position.
Congressman, thank you for all your work on this. As I think you probably know, some of the states have started to go ahead with what we could consider versions of your set it and forget it plan. California's passed a law that puts a process in place. Illinois is debating a similar proposal. Have you looked at those, and have you thought about what the interplay between things that are happening in the states and your legislation is going to be?
I think that the proposal that the Heritage and Brookings institutions put together really incented the states to get going on this before we did. And the states in a lot of ways, look, if your politics are left or right, doesn't make a difference. The states have really become laboratories of experimenting on a lot of different things. And I think that we never want to get in the way of what they're doing, but at the same time where we can augment and improve, that's really where we want to be. And I must tell you, I've had a great staffer on this who's a pension expert in Kara Getz. She has been terrific on these sorts of issues, and that's been her specialty in my office for a considerable period of time. But not to inhibit what the states are doing, only to enhance.
To both of you, and I know Senator Harkin hasn't made remarks yet, but you started to allude to this. So with comprehensive tax reform possibly happening, I'm just curious, because a lot of talk is about base broadening, lowering rates, getting rid of tax expenditures. So you alluded that it might be included somehow, but of course we all care about the current tax expenditures that are in there for retirement savings. So what do you see as the path forward for, because I know Senator Harkin, you also have a bill on retirement. So what do you see the path forward for?
I think there are three dangerous words here, and the three dangerous words are broaden the base. Because nobody really knows what that means. And as long as you keep it general, it becomes a very good talking point. When you get specific, it becomes less so. Broaden the base simply means somebody else is going to pay. I mean, in the vernacular, that's how you might interpret it. But I don't see, I will tell you this, based upon the very good sessions we had, Democrats and Republicans, they were really, I mean, they're very timely and very good when you heard people come in and talk about why this provision was in the code and the history of it and all. I thought it was extraordinary, and I thought that it built some goodwill. I did not get the impression that retirement savings was really on the horizon. I think the more imminent danger is the 28% cap that some have talked about. I think that could provide a bigger challenge for all of us. But even that I'm dubious about. So I think that, I think Dave Camp is very sincere. I think Max Baucus is very sincere. I think Tom would agree with this based on what's happening in the Senate. The White House really has not weighed in on tax reform. I mean, they're not up here beating the bushes on any of us. So I am, at the moment, confident that we're going to maintain the incentives for retirement savings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you again. Senator Harkin, we said that this is an event on coverage, not apparel, but on retirement savings coverage. Your name has been synonymous with retirement, not just about 2014, but about the need for our retirement system to work for all Americans. And we are very pleased to have you here today and to give us some remarks on the issues you've been working on. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Well, Lisa, thank you very much, and thanks for your invitation to be here. I apologize for being a little late. I was just chairing a hearing and kind of ran over a little bit. But I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and I want to commend my good friend Richard Neal for his leadership on retirement issues. As Lisa said, it's a subject near and dear to my heart. As a matter of fact, I chair a committee that's called Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. So I figure as long as I chair the committee, I should get involved very heavily in pensions. But I've been focused on it for a long time, and the need for having more retirement security here in America. You all know the story about what the gap is, the retirement gap, $6 trillion or more between what people have saved for retirement and actually what they're going to need. I've said many times it's probably the most underreported crisis facing Americans, and that is the lack of a really secure retirement system. So that's why I've offered a proposal to ensure that every working person has automatic access to a secure pension plan, retirement pension plan. It would create a universal, secure, and adaptable retirement funds, USA retirement funds for short. They would have the advantages of a traditional pension, in that it would have professional management, the economies of scale, longevity risk pooling, but it would also have the benefits, of course, of a 401k, in that employers would not have to bear all of the risk and all of the work in getting things set up. A third-party independent trustees would run the funds. Employers would only be responsible for making a fixed and predictable contribution. In other words, just a keystroke, just as they do their Social Security money and everything else, just keystroke that, and that goes out. They would have no other responsibility other than that. I would ask employers who do not already offer a pension or a generous 401k to automatically enroll their employees. So in other words, this would be automatic enrollment of an employee, but I guess you could opt out. The provision in there that you could opt out if you want. But we know the data on that kind of automatic enrollment. If automatic enrolled, people tend to stay with it. But if you have to sign up, they won't do it. We know that. So we provide it so that employees can sign up but can opt out. And let me again just say that what I'm focused on is not so much just a savings plan. I remember when 401k started. I was here. In the last century, as a matter of fact. I think I've been around a place a long time. 401ks were sold as a retirement program because defined benefits were going down for a number of reasons. And so 401ks kind of came up. It was retirement, save for retirement. Quite frankly, what they morphed into is basically a savings plan where you can take money out for a lot of different things. You can take lump sums out when you get near retirement because you think, boy, $100,000, that's a lot of money. I can do a lot of stuff with that $100,000. And so it's kind of become more of just a savings plan than a retirement plan. And we know the leakage. The leakage is tremendous on 401ks. And so when you're talking about 401ks or IRAs, things like, I'm all for savings, but that's not getting to the problem. The problem is the lack of a pension that will last you until the day you die. Now we have a small part of that in Social Security, but Social Security can't do it all. It can be one part of that stool, but it can't be the whole retirement savings. And so that's why I was encouraged the other day. I don't know Mr. Fink, the head of BlackRock, but he came out in favor of that sort of a program, much like the Australian type program, and where there would be a mandatory program, and it would be long-term investments, and it could only be a pension program. So that's what my USA Retirement Fund is set up to do. It's to set up an annuitized type of program where you can't borrow money from it, you can't take it out as a lump sum, and it would be annuitized so that you would get that annuity for as long as you live, a pension. So that's sort of like the defined benefit aspect of it. But no matter where you work, no matter where you go, how many times you change jobs, like a 401k, you can take it with you, no matter where you go, and it would, and you wouldn't, the individual would not be charged with the responsibility of knowing where to invest it and how to invest it. It would be done by, as I said, third-party trustees who would then have the responsibility of making sure those funds were invested wisely and safely over long term. It also, I think we need more in this country. We need that kind of asset base of long-term quiet capital, they call it, where money can be invested over long periods of time. Everybody keeps talking about the infrastructure needs of America. Well, we have them. Well, a lot of those are muni bonds and other kinds of bonds and things like that that need long maturity times. Well, if you want to put money into that, you need some aspect of investment that you can do that for a long period of time. To me, that's what a pension fund can do, because you don't need it tomorrow. We know the data. We know the how much is needed for any one given point in time through our longevity tables. So that's what I think is really important, is to set up a system that is universal. That's the same as Richard's. That's universal, that is mandatory. But I guess I am realistic enough to know that my Republican friends will never vote for a mandatory system, but they'll vote for a system, I think, where you join, but you can opt out of the system. And one that, as I said, you have a third-party trustee that has a fiduciary duty, not the employer, and where you would know at any given point in time, based upon what you have put into it, how much your annuity would be when you retire. But you would not be able to borrow against it or take it out as a lump sum. So that's really what I'm trying to get at with my legislation. That every American, every person would have the opportunity to earn a secure source of retirement income that they can't outlive. A lot of people, they think, well, gee, I got $100 and some thousand bucks for my 401k. Well, yeah, what happens when you get to be 85, 87, 90, and living longer, and you've outlived that resource? So again, one last thing I just mentioned is that my plan would not directly affect people with pensions already. If people already have good pension plans or good 401ks, they wouldn't have to do anything. There are plenty of employers out there that still have defined benefit plans, some that have very strong 401ks. But again, this would be a system where every employer would have to have a system set up for every employee that would be automatically enrolled, but that employee then could opt out. So that's where I think we ought to be headed. Towards, again, I keep using the word pension, a pension system, not just a retirement plan, but a pension plan that would last for as long as you live, and that would be universal. It'd be secure, and you could adapt it to anything, any job, no matter where you go. You would have access to that type of a pension system. So to me, that's where I think our country ought to head for a number of reasons, of which I just said, both for retirement security, but also for the capital that we need for, I think, long-term investment in this country. We spend too much time as Americans thinking about tomorrow or today, maybe today more than tomorrow. Short-term thinking. We need some long-term type of thinking in this regard. So I thank you very much. I'd be delighted to respond to any questions.
Senator Harkin, Can you reflect a little bit on this Congress and whether, in fact, the pressures that you spoke, the baby boom, the Senator, before you arrived, Congressman Neal spoke about the recession giving more of an urgency to retirement savings. Do you feel more urgency? Is there any sense, you've been in this institution for many years, is there a sense of momentum you feel about being able to move forward a plan like you're proposing?
Well, yeah, I think so, because I think that more and more people are finding out that their IRAs or their 401ks, as good of a savings program as that is, may not really last them when they get in retirement. So there's two things. I mean, there's savings, which we'd like to encourage more savings, obviously. But if people can use those savings for any kind of rainy day, and we all have rainy days in our life, or for school or housing or whatever it might be, people tend to use it for that. But if you've got something that you can't invade, and I think more and more people, I hope anyway, more and more people are thinking about these long-term aspects. But we need, I think by moving towards a system like I've described, I think more and more people, younger people, I guess I should say, more and more younger people, then will start to think about what happens to them when they get to be 70 and 75 and 80 years old, to just get a kind of a new culture in this country of thinking about what I need for retirement, rather than just thinking about what I need next week.
Questions before you leave? Questions? Ooh, you've silenced the group.
That's all right.
Justin,
Fine.
please.
I guess everyone agrees.
Yeah.
Senator, I think you're pushing the envelope on sort of what the conversation around this has been, and I think that's really important, because as much agreement as there is between you and Mr. Neal, there are a lot of big differences. One of the things that he talked a lot about was the prospects of tax reform and and his interest in defending the existing retirement savings incentive in the tax code, which help out, generally speaking, people with higher incomes more than they help out folks on the bottom end of the spectrum.
Sure.
Do you have thoughts about the likelihood of tax reform in the near future, and what's your attitude towards those existing tax supports for retirement savings?
I'm not on the Ways and Means, or I'm not on the Finance Committee, so I can't tell you what they're going to do. But I think Max wants to get some kind of a tax reform bill through before he leaves the Senate, and he's retiring like I am. So I think there's going to be a push by him to have some kind of a tax bill later this year, maybe early next year, but perhaps try to get something through in the closing days of this session of Congress in December. But the devil's in the details on that, right? But in terms of the tax benefits for retirement savings, if there's no one, I don't hear of anyone talking about taking that away or doing it, if anything, expanding it more, so that lower income Americans get the same kind of basic tax advantages, even though they may not be paying taxes as such. They would get it in another fashion, so that would encourage them also to take part in a savings program. And I want to be clear, I have nothing against savings. I want to encourage savings. But savings that can be used tomorrow for whatever is not a retirement program. That's not a retirement program. A program that puts money away so you know it's absolutely going to be there until the day you die, that's a retirement program, not a savings program.
Senator Harkin, we have an exciting panel that's going to follow you. We have AARP, Prudential, ASPPA, SEIU, and NCLR. We're going to take your comments and extend them further, but we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all very, very much.
I have the pleasure of bringing up Deb Whitman, the first of our panelists from AARP, to give us a few remarks.
hard to follow members of Congress, but I'll do my best. I wanted to thank Lisa and thank Aspen Institute for inviting me here to participate today. And I also really want to thank Senator Harkin and Congressman Neal for both their passion and their interest in offering real solutions to help Americans achieve a secure retirement. I'd like to use my time today to provide context for this important discussion, and so I'm going to cover a lot of ground fairly quickly because there are many facets to this problem, and I thought it would be helpful to set the stage. At AARP, we recently conducted a major research project on the state of the middle class, and we documented how stagnant incomes, rise in personal debt, and the cost of health care and other necessities have really undermined the retirement security for today's working Americans. We showed that the median income in this country was lower in 2011 than it was in 1997. And these trends are coinciding at the same time as a decline in defined benefit pensions and extremely low rates of personal savings. So the bottom line is we need to get more people to save more. And we really need to get them to save a lot more. And while the risk of an insecure retirement, it weighs on the future of the middle class, it's even worse for those at the bottom end of the ladder. And the public gets this. They know that something is wrong. A poll earlier by the National Institute on Retirement Security found that 85% of Americans were concerned about their ability to retire securely. And of that group, more than half said that they were very concerned. Fortunately, as we heard earlier, there are some good ideas to solve these problems. But before I talk about solutions, I really want to stop for a moment and get us all on the same page about the huge gaps that we need to fill. As Congressman Neal said, today only about half of all workers have the ability to save for retirement through their employer. And most of those uncovered are young women, including many African American and Hispanics, are young. And while the proportion of workers that currently have a defined benefit pension, that continues to shrink. So we have fewer people having much less access to savings. And even when they do have access to savings, more than 60% don't even take advantage of that opportunity. And the amount they save is far too low. 4 out of 10 families headed by a person age 45 to 64, that's right near retirement, have no nest egg whatsoever. And if they have one, if they're so lucky that they did save, the average amount is only $44,000. Finally, many, as we just heard, many who do save for retirement can't avoid the temptation or the need to withdraw those funds early. 1 in 4 take out the money for their rainy day needs, as we just heard from Senator Harkin. Why is this? Well, many people don't have any financial incentive to save. Federal tax incentives offer little or no benefits for people with low income. For example, an individual in the 10% tax bracket who saves $2,000 in a 401k gets a tax benefit of about $200. Yet somebody in the 35% tax bracket who saves the same amount gets a $7,000 or $700 tax bracket. And for the almost half of all households with no federal tax liability, they have few incentives to contribute to their IRA or 401k. So let me go through those key points because they show that the crisis in retirement that Senator Harkin just mentioned. So half of people have no access to retirement accounts, half actually participate, 1/4 take their money out early due to low incomes, virtually half have no savings at all. And so we shouldn't be shocked that at the end of the day, 40% of older families have no savings. Without action, therefore, we're looking at a really bleak retirement picture for the vast majority of American households. And so we need new policies and leadership from Washington. We need new products from the financial services industry. and we need employers to offer savings plan. I believe that the private sector has a major role to play in helping individuals save more for retirement. If we can have more employers offer access to 401ks or other retirement plans, and we can get those plans to have features like automatic enrollment and auto escalation of contribution, we know that people will save more because those features actually work. We also need plans to set higher contribution levels. The common choice of 3% per year is far, far too low. And we need to improve the tax incentives for retirement savings. These tax preferences should be expanded and distributed more fairly so that individuals who are in the middle class, as well as those with lower incomes, have greater incentive to build up their nest eggs. Moderate and low-income savers would be helped if we created a refundable savers credit and having a government match that could go right into their account. And there are many more ideas of ways to do this. But we also know individuals have to play a role as well. AARP recommends that people work longer if they can, because we know that maintaining their income and reducing the length of retirement can make a difference in their financial security. At Urban Institute recently found that just working one more year could increase retirement income by 9%, and 5 more years of work could increase it by 56%. AARP also encourages people to hold off early claims of Social Security if they can, because there is a way to lock in higher payments for for the rest of your life. And all of these ideas will work better if consumers get effective training in financial literacy, particularly at critical stages of decisions in their lives. And we need to be strategic about how we target the pertinent information and help them to make their decisions. More broadly, AARP is calling for a national conversation about how to strengthen retirement security in this country. The base of that should be preserving a strong and adequate program of Social Security, because Social Security remains the foundation of retirement security for most people and will continue to do so. But a national conversation should be broader than that. It should provide an opportunity to answer important questions such as how can we get more employers to offer workplace savings accounts? How can we get more employees to enroll, to stay enrolled, and to keep their money in their accounts? How can we foster a culture of retirement savings in this country so that more young people recognize the importance for their future? And finally, in a world with fewer defined benefit pensions, how can we make it easier for retirees to manage their nest eggs after they build them up? From my own time on Capitol Hill, I know that there's an interest in solving these problems on both sides of the aisle. To have a secure future for Americans in retirement, we must have a real bipartisan debate that develops solutions to all of these problems. And so I thank Aspen Institute for bringing us here to discuss these issues today.
Thank you, Deb. We're going to go straight to John Adler. Deb has positioned the big frame and called, I think you've given Aspen its job. We should be working with you to get this national conversation going. But John, she set you up well because Deb's many points went right to our labor force today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa and Aspen Institute for inviting me to participate today. Okay, so everybody here knows we have a retirement security crisis in this country. And probably everybody in the room can cite their own favorite statistic. Here's mine. You know, the fabled three-legged stool of pension savings and Social Security, it only exists today for the top quartile of American retirees. The remaining 75% of retired Americans rely overwhelmingly on Social Security for their income. And that's not by itself enough for them to maintain their pre-retirement standard of living. And I think that ought to be the goal, that every working American can maintain their pre-retirement standard of living when they can no longer work or choose to no longer work. So today, even the middle 50% of American retirees receive 74% on average of their income from Social Security. And that average is less than $15,000 a year. So that means that their total average income for the middle 50% is only $20,000 a year. This crisis disproportionately affects women, who make up 78% of the bottom quartile of retirees, African Americans and Latinos, whose elderly poverty rate is more than 2.5 times that of white Americans. It's about 19% for each of those groups, and it's about 7% for whites. And then for the young, and that is folks under 40, over 60% of them are at risk of not being able to maintain their standard of living in retirement right now. And if we do nothing, this situation will only get worse as traditional pension coverage continues to decline. Okay? Now, I think all of us in this room sense that this is an issue that ordinary Americans feel acutely. They sit at their kitchen tables, they pore over their pay stubs, their tax returns, and their quarterly retirement account statements if they get one, since we've all heard that more than half of American workers don't have a retirement account at work. And they try to figure out when and how they can afford to retire. They're struggling with this issue inside their homes, with their families, maybe their adult children, but it has not yet emerged as a major political issue here in Washington. We have champions like Congressman Neal and Senator Harkin, but this is not burning down the house here, right? I believe that it's only a matter of time as more and more baby boomers reach retirement age without any or enough savings to supplement that Social Security check, without enough home equity in many cases, in short, without the means to maintain their standard of living in retirement. And as they continue to age, lose the ability to continue working, which is the retirement plan for many people, just work as long as you can, and run out of savings, they're going to become a burden to their families and to the states who are going to have to provide additional social services to support these folks in retirement. We believe this issue is almost certain to become a major political crisis in the not too distant future. So what do we do about it? Well, SEIU believes that the best approach would be to strengthen Social Security so that its base benefits provide more income replacement for our most vulnerable seniors, and to create supplemental savings plans for all Americans who don't have a retirement plan at work. So we heartily support the approach that Senator Harkin has detailed today for his USA retirement plans. And we also support the efforts of states that were mentioned in a question earlier, like California, to fill the gap by passing state-sponsored auto IRA plans for workers whose employers don't offer a retirement plan. California's Secure Choice Retirement Savings Plan will offer pooled professional investment management, low management fees, portability, and low-cost annuitization to provide lifetime income to retirees. What it doesn't offer, because of the limitations of federal law, is the ability of employers to also contribute to their employees' retirement savings, which is one reason that we prefer Senator Harkin's long-term federal solution over state solutions. But the truth is, the sooner we enable more workers to access retirement savings plans at work, the sooner we will begin to address this crisis. And time is our enemy here. For folks that are nearing retirement, for folks who are middle-aged, there's no time to waste. So if there's gridlock, or as Congressman Neal referred to it, stalemate here in Washington, let's get moving down the highway with the best solutions we can come up with in the states while still fighting to pass the best legislation we can in Washington. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Judy Miller, and we are not going to waste any time at this briefing. And Judy, we are thankful for your comments as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for arranging this and for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'd like to start off by saying that although we weren't on the list that Mr. Neal read off, ASPPA is a strong supporter of the auto IRA proposal. And we have Also been supportive of certain state efforts was subject to certain criteria. We were supportive of the California bill as it passed. We believe strongly in the need for a vibrant marketplace, and so we support state initiatives and we support Mr. Neal's auto IRA initiative because the government arrangement, whether it's the R bond for the Neal bill or the California Secure, the trust set up by the state in California, that it's the default, but that employers can be encouraged to adopt other types of arrangements. We think auto IRA is extremely important because, as has been said earlier, people save at work. And if they don't have a workplace savings arrangement, they're not going to do that. And, you know, the mandate, I don't really like that word, the requirement that employers offer payroll deduction savings at work is unavoidable. You know, you cannot, you know, people only really save through payroll deduction. And you can't get payroll deduction without going through the employer. So at some point, if we're going to have universal access to retirement savings, it's going to have to be done through the employers, and it's a matter of how we do it, you know, how we accomplish that. So I was encouraged to hear Mr. Neal say that he's hopeful that if there is some kind of tax reform program that Mr. Camp and T-Berry will be accommodating maybe and get his proposal in place as is with the requirement for employers. I hope that that's the case. If not, I think we should look at how we can facilitate these arrangements. You know, California has this program that, you know, once there's a study done that says it can work and it's needed, which to me is obvious, then there still needs to be legislative action to actually enable it. It's a struggle. There have been these discussions going on in other states, and part of the reason for that is that some of the lines aren't overly clearly drawn in terms of, you know, is it an ERISA arrangement? The state doesn't want to get into being an ERISA fiduciary, and they shouldn't. And I think all of us as state residents probably don't want to become one ourselves for the rest of the population. But it's something that I think could be helped if Mr. Neal's bill, even without the requirement, were in place, but gave clear guidelines and clarity that the state, if they adopted a certain structure, could go forward and have the guts to make it a requirement themselves. So I'm hopeful that one way or another there will be some federal framework or movement on this, because companies are justifiably concerned that, you know, this will be like, I don't know, the insurance market where you have a poor small business owner in Northern California who also has employees in Oregon and is subject to two different sets of rules on what the coverage requirements are, you know, or two different defaults, that kind of thing. So I would hope that we can come up with federal guidelines or federal assistance in moving auto IRA forward, regardless of the details of how that's going to work. I do think that auto IRA is a good idea in large part because we think that Aspen members deal largely with smaller employers. And it's very difficult to get an employer's attention about setting up a retirement program. They can't afford a contribution, most of them, so we're opposed to any program that requires a contribution from employers. But they also just have a lot of other things on their mind. We think that once they're used to having retirement savings run through their payroll system, it'll be easier to talk to them about putting in another plan, and that they will hopefully move up to a qualified retirement plan. Have a preference, I'm speaking on my own behalf here, for the qualified retirement plan structure with a trust, with ERISA protections over auto IRA as a lifetime savings arrangement, view it as an entry-level thing, something that will provide access for everybody, but something that also will hopefully encourage employers to move up to a more substantial structure, and when they're stable enough and can afford it, to start to contribute for their employees. When you're talking about savings for people at lower incomes levels, I'm not even talking moderate, but lower income levels, I think I would agree with what Mr. Adler said in terms of, Social Security is, the bulwark already of retirement security for those people. And for lifetime low-income earners, I think it's unreasonable to think it's ever going to be otherwise. We can have a refundable credit, but if you can't afford to, buy baby food, you're probably not going to save anyway. And so I think that as we look at retirement security and look at it broadly, that we all hopefully will embrace Social Security as a good, solid, necessary, universal defined benefit plan and say that it is a bottom line on this structure. But then when we go one step further and say, again, as John said, that our goal should be for people to maintain their standard of living in retirement, that also then means that people that have higher replacement levels from Social Security don't need to save as much, from personal savings, as long as we keep a very progressive, Social Security structure. That's more rational in terms of our expectations. And I think that when we're judging how something is going to work, that we need to keep that in mind. Case in point, this is not a coverage issue. I'm diverging a little bit here, but there's been a lot of discussion about having a stretch match, the need to increase auto enrollment levels for workers, because if they're enrolled at 3% and stay at 3%, that's not going to lead to a secure retirement. So instead of providing a full match at 6%, maybe the match should be, provided, you should have to put in 10%. I could actually argue both sides of that easily, but I haven't won on either side from my own perspective, in that we know that people, their contribution rates cluster around the auto enrollment rate and around the rate at which you get the maximum match. So if we increase the rate at which you get the maximum match, probably, people are going to migrate to that, or a large number of people will, and will have some higher savings. But I worry about the lower income people who, frankly, can't afford to save 10%. And so are we going to reduce the employer contribution, which is a critical part of the equation to me overall as a long-term goal? And maybe we do that in the context of a refundable savers credit. And, but I think as we're talking about these things, we tend to talk about them one at a time and not necessarily putting them all together. And I think we need to be conscious of putting them all together and viewing them as a whole. That being said, one more point, this is not about tax incentives, but I have to comment on that because as economists like Dr. Whitman like to look at tax incentive in, I think, an overly simplistic fashion as to who benefits. The contribution times the marginal rate, and as long as you have a progressive tax structure, then you have higher benefits for people that are at higher income levels. But as someone who worked for many, many years getting small employers to put in retirement plans and working on those retirement plans, I know that how I sold the employer on putting that plan in was showing them how much their tax savings was going to be, and that they could use that to make the contributions that were required by the non-discrimination rules. So when we're talking about the employer-based system, that's different than capital gains or whatever. You can't max out unless you have a non-discriminatory arrangement, and that generally, especially in a small business environment, is going to require that you have a 3% contribution for everybody, sometimes 5% if you're really going to push the limits on what you as an owner can deduct. And we have to be careful that we aren't taking people that are now getting 3% of pay, 5% of pay, in some cases 7.5% of pay, and say, gee, great, we're giving you a 15% refundable and 18% refundable credit on your own contribution. That's not a good solution. So I think as we're looking at expanding coverage, we need to be careful not to take a huge step backward in the process. I was grateful to hear that there doesn't appear to be an appetite to reduce the existing tax incentives. I think we need to expand coverage by expanding coverage, not by taking away some of the current benefits. One other quick point, when we talk about expanding coverage, we always talk about small business. That's only half the problem. Part-time workers are a huge part of the uncovered population. If you look at statistics for full-time workers, it's much more favorable than if you include all workers. Mr. Neal's bill, HR 4050 from last year, had a provision that would have had permanent part-time workers, give them the ability to contribute to a 401k plan. I'd encourage those looking at this issue to think about that and that type of approach. I think that it's better to have these issues dealt with through ERISA at a federal level than have a state come in and say, oh, put your part-time workers in here. Let's look at this as a whole. Let's be realistic about what our problems are and look forward to working with everyone to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. I'm going to bring Eric Rodriguez up. Those of you who are staffers, we are delivering what's promised. This is a nuanced conversation. Judy, you just went through, I think, the top 20 issues in U.S. retirement policy in 6 minutes. So stay tuned. Eric, welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, there was my presentation. I'm just kidding, of course. But thank you all for being here. And, I certainly want to thank the Senator and the Congressman to continue to push forward these issues via proposals that allow us to have more discussion overall. In case you don't recall, I'm Eric Rodriguez for the National Council of La Raza, where I'm a Vice President over public policy. I also want to certainly thank Lisa, who's in her tireless efforts to keep a focus on this particular issue over time. Has been outstanding and continuing to include other voices in the conversation, including the perspective of Latinos, has been great. So thank you for that. Some of you know our organization because we do a lot of work on immigration reform. We have for the years. We're known for that. But many of you don't know that we've done a lot of work around economic issues, Social Security, retirement savings and pensions and other issues over the years. And we've done so because the economic issues that face our community are quite daunting, and because when you look at demographic projections over time, you start to realize that more and more the economic status, opportunity, and potential of Latino workers and future workers is increasingly going to contribute or really reflect the strength of the country economically. So we look hard at the status of the community, their opportunities, how they're engaging in retirement systems and otherwise as a way to think about what we need to do to strengthen the country in the future. And you've heard already from Lisa that Latinos represent 1 out of every 4 school children today, and will represent 1 out of every 2 Americans entering the labor force in the future. So that gives you a sense of where we're heading, and that's why retirement security issues for the community are very much on our minds. And overall, you've continued to hear that almost half of all workers do not have any type of retirement plan at work, and for Latinos, that's about 2/3. So the conditions are worse. And lots of reasons that you've heard here are particularly acute for the Latino workforce. Many work in low-wage jobs for small and private companies, and are industries where workplace retirement savings just aren't available. So construction, maintenance, hospitality, food service occupations struggle with retirement savings options. In addition, the growth of involuntary part-time employment, just remains a very big issue for the community. But what it says is at least 2 important things. The first is, as has been said, that the social insurance programs are crucial for this community over time. And That certainly has to be said here in this context. The second certainly is that we too believe that retirement markets and private markets for savings need to work for this community as well. So we ought to be thinking about more policies that put in place more incentives to save, because in fact we are likely to see more economic mobility over time between generations, but also within working communities in our community, which very much reflects the immigrant experience in this country. So for the first thing I want to say is, with the 50% and 2/3 of Latinos that don't have employer-sponsored retirement plans, Social Security just has become increasingly important. And there's lots of information and stats on that, but certainly one that sticks out for me is that more than half of all Latino seniors rely on Social Security for at least 90% of their retirement income right now. And if you look at other numbers of dependency and reliance on Social Security, you realize it's just a crucial insurance system, and there are still many workers, because of immigration status over time, who are ineligible for Social Security and ultimately will be when they retire or fail to have the qualifying quarters. That will become major issues for them, and certainly this bill that we're discussing now could have an influence over that as well. So we're involved in those conversations as well. But as many of you know, as we have found out, Social Security just shouldn't be the only source of income, which is why we've engaged in the conversation around private market options for low-wage workers. And I do think that certainly, when we started talking about this, it very much was true that many experts in the field would just discount, the large numbers of low-wage workers and say, look, forget about them. They're about social insurance, and we just shouldn't even bother with that segment of the population. And I think we certainly disagree. I mean, we saw lots of low-wage workers, in fact, saving. We talked to a lot of people in the field who, in fact, wanted to save for retirement and wanted more options to do so. And again, with the notion that there's probably a lot more mobility than we tend to see in some of the data, where providing some opportunities and incentives to save remains crucial. So when we look at the policy options, and we like a lot of what we're seeing more recently between the automatic enrollment options and certainly Harkin's bill, and was mentioned the California effort as well, which I think John and others can talk to with more detail, but has some really good features that we like, most of which are proposals that are designed to make it simple and easy for workers to participate. And if you look at California, where you have a large chunk of workers that are Latino, it's going to be interesting to see how that proposal is rolled out and ultimately implemented and adopted in ways that tries to bring in more and more Latino workers, but also immigrant workers into the framework. And so we're hopeful and we're optimistic that we'll get to learn a lot through states that are advancing on this level in the ways that the federal government really isn't at this stage. The Harkin proposal, very similarly, I think has a lot of features that we ultimately like, and we intend to certainly support that moving forward. And we know it's going to be attractive to many Latino workers to be involved in these plans. Lastly, you've heard a lot of talk about tax reform, and I do think with respect to tax reform, it may serve as an important opportunity for us to talk about how the incentives are really just flipped. And indeed, where the more income and wealth you have, the more opportunity and incentive to save there is out there, and thinking about different ways to reach down for other workers who are low wage or low income at this time, may grow over time, but ultimately with some incentives and programmatic solutions, we think can become more financially and economically secure over time. So again, we hope at least that there'll be an opportunity to have that discussion, even if it's essentially needs to be neutral. There are changes that can be made that within the tax code that we think might be helpful and at least ought to be debated at this stage, and we hope to make some arguments with our friends over that. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric. I'd like to welcome Jamie Kalamarides of Prudential to finish off our panel of speakers, and Jamie, we give you the last words here on the panel.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to thank everyone, Lisa and everyone at Aspen, for assembling this great panel to talk about coverage. We agree with so many of the items that have been talked about today, that saving at the workplace is the best place to save. It is the spot that we can use behavioral finance principles to pay yourself first, to use the benefits of automatic enrollment, contribution escalation, investments into a default, help individuals avoid making mistakes. We also like workplace-based savings systems because they work at medium and large employers. But as we've heard, they don't work for small employers. And who works at small employers? You've heard it from everybody here. People that are more likely to be lower to moderate income, people who are more likely to be women, more likely to be people of color, more likely to be younger. And because of that, we need to solve this, how to overcome and create workplace-based coverage solutions at small businesses. We understand through our practical experience and through our research that small business owners have not yet responded to the opportunities of providing defined contribution plans for 3 reasons. They're too expensive, they're too administratively much hassle, and they have individual fiduciary responsibility. Small business owners are personally liable. It breaks the seal, the corporate seal, the corporate veil, and goes to their personal responsibility if they don't follow the ERISA law. So our challenge is how do we overcome the barriers that small businesses have to adopt, and we've heard about some great solutions. I want to comment on 2 particular items that we haven't mentioned yet so far, but are very complementary, and these concepts are included in Mr. Neal's automatic IRA bill. They're included in Senator Harkin's proposal around his USA plan, and they're included in Mr. Kind and Mr. Reichert's bills, the SAVE Act as well. Those 2 concepts are, first, multiple employer plans as a solution, a complementary solution to the automatic IRA. And then second, the important role of lifetime income. You can't talk about savings without talking about how you're going to create lifetime income about it. And multiple employer plans this concept is very simple. Allow small businesses to pool their purchasing power, to reduce cost, to reduce the administrative hassle, and to transfer, not reduce, but transfer the fiduciary responsibility to an independent professional. All the concepts that we've been talking about and all the proposals we've talking about do just that. They allow small businesses to pool their purchasing power. They remove the one bad apple law right now. If we're all small businesses and there's one bad apple, it ruins the whole batch. We can certainly isolate it to just the one bad apple. They all transfer and recognize the role of an independent fiduciary, separate from the providers, and many of the concepts offer a model plan so that there's more consistency. That allows providers to compete based on cost, based on service, investment performance, and just pure cost, rather than on model design. If we simplify the plan for the individual and for the employer, we can make a great difference. Let me talk last about coverage as a second concept. You can't just get people to save at the workplace without allowing them to turn that lifetime of savings into income for life. We believe that innovation continues to be required both on the product side and the delivery side, but also in the regulatory environment. Americans don't buy fixed annuities because they think it's all or nothing. They think it's now or never. They think you're dead and it's gone if you die early, and they think if you get sick, you get stuck. So we need solutions and regulations that allow people to have lifetime income that's not all or nothing, that's not now or never, that's not dead and gone, and that's not sick and stuck. And there continue to be great innovations that allow people to save within workplace-based retirement plans and create lifetime income. And we are very supportive of the proposals that encourage these sort of developments at the workplace, especially in conjunction with these coverage solutions at small employers. Thanks so much.
So before we let this panel go, I wanted to bring it back. As you've noticed, this is really a diverse group of folks talking about the same issue, and I think it's obvious that there is a lot that we share on this issue. But I want to start with Jamie and Judy, and just both of you are really the financial industry part of our panel here. And both of you have acknowledged the way you support both the Harkin and Neal, aspects of Harkin and Neal proposals today. So my question is, are you alone? Or do you find yourself at this time, do you think there are more of your colleagues in the financial industry who are interested in advancing these proposals to advance coverage?
It's never a good idea to speak for my competitors, but I will. A couple groups that have spoken out. I think that, well, I know the Chamber of Commerce supports the ideas around multiple employer plans. Small business owners, and you've heard it from many others, don't like the idea of mandates, but they like the idea of overcoming the barriers around pooling their purchasing power, being able to transfer fiduciary responsibility, be able to remove the one bad apple piece. I think many providers are not looking for the perfect, they're looking for the practical. And they also would rather not have a patchwork sort of approach. They'd rather have a federal solution that works within the ERISA environment and that recognizes the important role of the fiduciary, but also makes it practical for small business owners and their employees to be able to solve these challenges. Every provider I know of wants to solve the coverage solution. There's just a variety of solutions to do it.
Got it. Okay, very good. Anything to add, Judy?
One or two quick things. Generally, I agree. I've seen everybody really is concerned about coverage, and it's a matter of what they view as the best way to do it. I think as there's more state-level activity, there is more interest in making sure that in trying to really do something at the federal level so we don't have a patchwork of rules.
Okay.
On the multiple employer plan front, there is a need to clean that up. There's no need for, if 50 employers are under the same plan just because they're not all members of the dental association or something, there's no need for that plan to file 50 different 5,500 forms. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
There is a need for that plan to say these 50 employers have adopted it. There is a need for somebody to be responsible for seeing that systems are in place to operate that properly. And it's unclear that if we just change the bad apple rule, that automatically happens. So we think there should be someone that's claiming responsibility for the operational aspects of the plan, and that would clear things up. Because if somebody is that one bad apple, but it's because small employers count on their provider to tell them what they need to do. And if there's a bad apple because nobody told them they were top heavy, I don't really blame the employer. I think that if they're ignoring something they've been told, that's fine. But if they were never told, then I think whoever claims to have been operating that plan should have some responsibility there.
Okay, thanks. John, you used the phrase, the sort of conundrum, where you said, people are anxious at the dinner table about retirement security. And Deb, your polling showed at ARP, they're anxious. Eric, you gave the stunning stats in the Latino community about what's missing in the financial security picture. Is now the moment from John, you gave some doubt to that, but are we at a moment as the coverage bell rang and we see more anxiety? Is now a moment for moving this issue forward? Any of you?
I actually think the moment would have been about 2 decades ago. It's not like the retirement of the baby boom is a great shock to us all. We've seen this demographic bubble moving along for some time. And like I said, we're to the point where people close to retirement, if you gave them a box to check that said, "Are you terrified?" would check that box, half the population. So we're behind the times in looking at ways to solve this problem. The sooner we solve it, the better. And it's good to have this conversation in the context of how are we going to create a secure retirement more broadly? Not just how can we get people to save more? How can we have a Social Security system that's going to be there to last, that's going to provide retirement income as they age? How are we going to have a health system and a long-term care system that also supports? We need to look not just at the 3 legs of the stool, but really what affects families as they age.
We have stool sitting. Yeah, thank you, Deb. John?
Yeah, I would like to think that now is the time, but I don't think we're there yet, because I don't think that individual anxiety has yet translated into a political movement and a demand that government help drive solutions to the problem. And truthfully, I believe that ultimately it has to be bipartisan. I think the problem we have in Washington, Congressman Neal stated it very well. It doesn't matter that it was a Brookings and Heritage Foundation proposal. There are no Republicans that are willing to step up and co-sponsor the bill. Let me just tell one little story here. Right now in Oregon, there's a proposal along the lines of the California bill that started out with a Republican co-sponsor and a Democratic co-sponsor. And when it came up for a vote in the Labor Committee, I think the Oregon House Labor Committee, the insurance industry had lobbied vociferously against it, ACLI, and the Republican co-sponsor voted against it. Even though I think the guy supports it. But it speaks volumes to the problem that we have, that this, in order to make this the moment, we have to be able to transcend the partisan politics that just has us in gridlock, certainly in Washington. And I think we need Republican legislators, we need the financial services industry to step up and say, this is a real problem. I was so happy that Larry Fink came out and made that statement a couple of weeks ago about the need for universal coverage. I mean, if the players, I feel like much of the financial services industry doesn't want to disturb the current system. They think that it's fine. And I don't think it's fine. I think we've got real problems, and that we need the financial services industry to step up and say, we've got to figure out how do we address this coverage issue. It's not enough to have, it's unacceptable that 50% of Americans don't have access to a retirement savings plan at work.
And Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. I mean, I don't see the strong political will that's out there, but I would say a few things. A few years ago, AARP, in fact, did a study on the sandwich generation that really, I thought was quite good, because it sort of talked about how workers are currently having to do more to take care of their parents in retirement. This is particularly true in the Latino community, and more so where you have parents who are not eligible for Social Security or don't receive lots of social insurance benefits very acutely aware. And I remember we did a town hall on Social Security in Philadelphia a few years back, where an older adult, was listening to our presentation on Social Security and got up and said, "Well, is someone going to take away my benefits if these proposals, move forward, et cetera?" And of course, the panel said, "No, nothing will happen. You won't be touched." And another panelist said, "Well, but your children will have to pay a whole lot more for retirement," and the senior looked at the panelists and said, "Well, that's okay." now, of course, if her children were in the audience,
depends on which layer of the sandwich you are.
Right. So I do think that there's going to be a generation that's really becoming cognizant and becoming more politically engaged and active, who may be an audience outside of the Beltway for some of this conversation that we're probably not touching right now.
I have left 1 minute for questions, which is a sin at an Aspen event. But if I could raise any of the questions that are here, and then we'll just do a rapid round. So, questions? Quick? Oh, maybe I've scared you all off, or you're all, or ask them all. All right, Lenny Glenn of Putnam Investments.
Not so much a question as a statement. I just want to say for Putnam, we're strongly supportive of any effort to expand.
We're strongly supportive of any effort to expand retirement coverage. We've been fully supportive of Mr. Neal's efforts, and we believe that the time to do it is as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think in fairness, Larry Fink wasn't the first one in the financial industry to say we've got a problem. So other issues or questions? Virginia Reno of the National Academy of Social Insurance.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. I would suggest that some of our recent research, this is turning into a question, but our recent research has shown that the American people in some ways are way ahead of the policymakers in terms of what they want and are willing to pay for. in the Social Security system. Do you have the same kind of sense in this area of supplemental private savings, that in fact the American electorate may be ahead of our leaders?
Very interesting question. Anybody on the panel want to react? So the question is, American people want more out of their Social Security system and somewhat ahead. Have we done research that would show, or surveys that show, that they're also ahead of their politicians on private savings? John? And then Deb?
We have seen surveys where folks are asked about potential supplemental savings plans, and they like the idea. I will say this, that if you ask small businesses about a government-sponsored plan, those are sort of, it's like no government sponsorship, right? So they want private plans, and so in some ways it depends how it's depicted, and whether you call an auto IRA a government plan or a private plan, depends on the eye of the beholder perhaps. But I do think the desire is out there, much as you said, Virginia, and I just think the politicians haven't figured out yet that this is an issue that has legs. And I honestly think that the political leaders that step up and claim this issue and create practical solutions and drive them forward will get tremendous support from that. That's my belief.
Thank you. I'm going to pull us together. Those are great last words. We were fortunate to have great leaders, and we had a wonderful panel. Thank you all.